Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, and I'm delighted to be joined this week by Scott Crichton of Ellis Whittam. Scott and I are both members of the HSE People Panel, and we talk a bit about that today. We go into Scott's background, and we also have some interesting discussions around persuasion, influencing, perceptions of health and safety, and various other things as well. But one of the reasons Scott was keen to appear is because he's a consultant and he's got lots of different clients in various sectors, particularly focusing in on the public sector. He was keen to turn the tables a little bit and actually ask me some questions too. So the podcast is kind of split 50-50. I don't know exactly 50-50, but more or less 50-50. Me grilling Scott and then Scott grilling me as well. But hopefully you'll find both parts interesting and useful. If you do enjoy the episode, please hit subscribe, please give us a review, please share us on social media, and let any friends, family, colleagues, etc. know about the podcast that you think could be interested in it. With that then, let's get into the conversation and join Scott and myself. Cheers. Welcome to the podcast, Scott. How are you going today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Christian. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, recording this on a Saturday, which is a good day to record podcasts as far as I'm concerned.
It is. A bit cloudy here in Gloucester.
Is it?
Yeah.
How's it here in London? It's a little bit cloudy, yeah. At least it's not raining like it was a few weeks ago where it was just hammering it down for about 10 days.
That's true.
Yeah, so we've got an interesting episode today because Scott and I had a chat before, and we're going to talk a bit about Scott and his background and how he sees things. But then Scott was also keen to ask me some questions or get my input on a few things for the benefit of his clients. So I think the plan is to share this to some clients. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely the plan. Yeah, try and help them.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, let's talk about you first because I'm more interested in talking about you than me. So, I mean, how does it feel, Scott, as a starting question, to have thousands of people, including students in schools, relying on your advice and help at the start of the pandemic, and throughout the pandemic, in fact?
Yeah, so I would say the COVID-19, in terms of what we've done as a business, has been something that we're really proud of. Difficult time for all of us. Government guidance changing for the education sector quite frequently, and as you say, we've got numerous amount of education clients throughout the country. So there was times when I was up till 11 o'clock at night typing up a risk assessment that was sort of published then the next day, which clients were then asking for, whereas local authority councils were taking sort of days and weeks to get updated guidance out.
So and then you woke up the next day and the government guidance changed.
It changed again, yeah. So then you're behind again and you've got to update it again. But in terms of how it feels, as I say, I'm incredibly proud of what we've done and we've managed to do with our sort of COVID-19 support and packages for our schools and education clients and everyone else that we support as a business. But yeah, it's been a challenging 18 months for all of us, and particularly when you've got organisations coming to you that are supporting schools and asking us what is our sort of take on advice and how do we support schools and what should we make of government guidance has been quite tricky because we're not the government. But we've had to interpret and advise how we see best and what we think is the best advice to give to clients and non-clients alike.
Yeah, it's been an absolute minefield, hasn't it, to be honest?
Yeah,
it really has. I mean, obviously, I am quite niche in terms of the areas that I look at, but when it comes to the hygiene aspect, the government guidance to me was very poor in that it wasn't specific enough, and it just left far too much room for error and ambiguity. Which is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, for schools, I think really they just want to get things right. They want to do the right thing for the children and for the staff, and they want to get things right. And that's been a very challenging thing for the last 18 months because everything's just changed so much.
Yeah. I mean, my son's school. I've got two sons. One's at school and one is a bit younger, but they've been fantastic, and you can see that the kids are at the heart of everything and keeping the safety levels and everything, and they want to do the right thing, but I can only imagine that it's been difficult to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us a bit about Ellis Whittam then, and what it is you guys do, and then your role there. And then I'd be interested to go back a bit in time and look at some of the other things you've done throughout your career as well.
Yeah, so Ellis Whittam is a health and safety consultancy company and employment law company based in Chester. We've got an office in Glasgow and one in London as well. So we support clients throughout the UK from various different fields and sectors. So education is just one of those sort of main sectors. We've got a team of, say, 40 odd consultants throughout the UK. And we've just recently been acquired by a company called Marlowe PLC. So we've got now a sort of sister network of other companies under the Marlowe PLC banner to support us and clients as well. So I've been with Ellis Whittam for 4.5 years. We're all home-based consultants, and we typically see sort of 3 to 4 clients a week, and support those clients in meeting their legal statutory requirements and duties.
Yeah, great. And before this, you've had a fairly varied career. You've worked in some different sectors. Do you want to talk us through your sort of career path and any kind of key insights or learnings for the different roles you've had?
Yeah, so I was left school, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I had 2 options. One was the RAF, because my stepdad was in the RAF, and then the other option was the police force. So I opted for the RAF, and I entered the Air Force at 18, went down to RAF Halton in Buckingham, did my sort of basic training, and ended up in a job that I didn't really particularly want to do, which is another long story in itself. But I ended up doing it, which was essentially sort of basic accountancy for the catering department. I did that for about 2.5 years. I thoroughly enjoyed the RAF, I just didn't particularly like the job I did. And then back in 2005, they were making redundancies. So I decided at that point that I was going to leave and try my other option from school, which was the police force, as I said. That didn't work out or materialise for me after 4 times. It took me 4 times to realise it's maybe not for me. But I am quite a tenacious individual, and I do sort of determination, press on. And then at the 4th sort of unsuccessful application, I thought, hey, maybe this is not for me then. So at that point, I'd already had a job with a company called Securitas, which you may have heard of. I was working with them initially as what they called a lean coordinator. So your sort of 6 Sigma, 5S, Kaizen type of Japanese methodologies.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I need to rethink about my career, what I'm going to do. So I started a diploma in management at a college, local college, and I progressed on to doing a business management degree. And at the same time, the person that was looking after health and safety was retiring, and they asked me did I want to take it on. So I guess you could say, pardon the pun, I fell into health and safety, like many of us do. And that was in 2006. And here I am in 2021, 15 years later, so still practicing. So I went from Securitas, which changed companies, to a company called Loomis, to then Voltex. So I left them in 2013. And then I had a short spell with Southwestern Ambulance Service based down in Exeter. And then I left them in 2016 and joined Ellis Whittam.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a bit of a varied past in various different private and public sector organisations.
The 6 Sigma stuff, is that, I've come across that before in operations of cleaning, for example. So I remember one of the big supermarket chains was kind of obsessing over this and trying to get their cleaning companies to be more efficient a few years ago. I don't know how it ended up in the end, but I mean, is that applicable to health and safety as well?
For sure, yeah. It's about process improvement. So if you were looking at health and safety as a process improvement, then yeah, absolutely. And fundamentally, it's about changing people's behaviours. So the whole area around about human factors. So if you're trying to make a process smoother or leaner, then obviously you're relying on human beings to play their part, which is exactly the same as health and safety as well. So yeah, I would suggest that the two sort of go hand in hand, and it's a good idea for anyone to have an understanding of those Japanese methodologies.
Okay. Is there a good place to, is there like a website, or is it go to Wikipedia to sort of get the overview of it? Or I know people run courses on it, don't they?
We do, yeah. There's different belts. So you've got yellow belt, green belt, black belt, master black belt. So any of those type of courses that you could go and scour the internet looking for. But we actually used Unipart Logistics because they were big into Six Sigma and lean manufacturing back in 2006. So they had some very good methods that they were using, sort of the comm cells where they would get a group of people huddled around the board and go through sort of performance and any issues. And so it's more around about, and again, similar to health and safety and risk assessment, is engaging the people that do the job. So not sort of beating them or bashing them with a big stick, but actually saying, look, this is how we did. Is there anything else you can think of how we can improve?
Yeah, and you've spoken about that quite a lot in your articles and posts on social media and stuff, haven't you? That seems to be a passionate that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if the people are not engaged, then they're not going to do it. So you definitely have to get them engaged, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why we create this content and stuff, isn't it? Like the podcast and like being on the HSE People Panel, which you're a fellow member of too. How have you found that so far?
Yeah, it's really good. I just finished an article about road safety for outside of schools, so I'm hoping that's going to be published before the Road Safety Week in November. So yeah, I really enjoy it because I learn from typing up those articles, and then obviously I can help people. So I'm very passionate about helping people and sort of looking after, caring for other people. Yeah. So yeah, I enjoy it. It's really good. I think we've got a great sort of network support team where we bounce off each other as well. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I enjoyed we've got a little WhatsApp group, and that's always good fun, just sharing what each other are up to and helping each other out with ideas and stuff, which is great. And what's your particular sort of area then of focus for the panel?
So I've been branded as the public sector expert specialist.
Oh, that's a small area. That's
easy. So I guess with my military cap on, the emergency services, and then dealing with the education sector, that's why I've fitted into that mold. But often, and this is what we wanted to talk about this morning, was about public sector and various organisations such as that, who they don't have an unlimited finite resource out there. So it's about doing what's reasonably practical and what you can do, rather than just chucking loads of money at something, which obviously a private company can do if they so choose.
Yeah, although they don't seem to want to most of the time. No. It's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? They've got more money, but they don't want to spend it. Yeah. In many cases. Although I do think that with the pandemic and stuff, obviously safety and risk is kind of more prominent than it was, and I do sense that there's partly because of the pandemic, partly because of kind of different attitudes for the younger generation about the environment, ESG and things like that. I do think that increasingly safety and risk is going to be much more prominent for companies. Yeah. I think actually you're going to have to be seen to be doing it properly, otherwise you're going to be struggling to retain staff and attract staff and get customers.
I completely agree. So two things from me is sort of you've got this. I think that we're almost on a sort of cusp of a shift of health and safety, and I think the pandemic sort of helped us as those that are practitioners in this field to really sort of get other people to buy into health and safety. I love a quote that Richard Branson uses, which is about, if you look after your staff, then they'll look after your customers. It's not rocket science. It's very sort of logical, common sense thinking. So I definitely think we're on a sort of cusp of changing. And as you mentioned as well, with younger practitioners, so I'm 37 and I've been practicing for 15 years now. So I think we come at health and safety with a different sort of viewpoint. It's not so much about, well, you can't do that. It's more around about, well, let's look at other solutions to sort of fix a problem. And if you're a problem solver like I am, then you don't want to be just offering, you can't do this. You want to be offering sort of solutions to problems. So I definitely think, what you're saying is we are, the pandemic has certainly helped us as professionals to raise our awareness within organisations and the importance to health and safety.
Yeah, and I think that health, safety, risk management, but I know they're slightly different, but bundling them together, it's a great proving ground and a great skill set to have, I would argue, to actually be leading businesses in the future. I mean, typically, if you look at CEOs of companies at the moment, they're not health and safety practitioners. Often they've come from finance or sales. But I think actually, because you have to cross the whole spectrum of the business, because you have to have an understanding of how things work, because you have to be a problem solver, because you have to have empathy, and you have to have the bottom line in, all of these things tick a huge amount of boxes to actually start navigating and growing up the corporate ladder, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the transferable skills from being, in this field is immense. As you've mentioned a few there, you are a leader essentially. I believe every health and safety or risk management, whatever you want to call yourself, professional, is a leader, and you're influencing and inspiring people. You've got to have project management skills. You've got to have really great communication skills. You've got to articulate well. So as you mentioned, you're going through a wide variety of an organisation from different departments, and you have to influence people. So yeah, I think it's a great career. It's not one that I set out from school to do, but as part of an article I released a couple of weeks ago. Why should people not be thinking about health and safety when they're at school as a career option? It's the things I've seen that I would never have seen if I was in another role. So for instance, I seen the Bloodhound car a few months back down in Barclay, which is the car that they're trying to break the land speed record out in South Africa, right in front of me. So and we all throughout various different environments throughout the UK and abroad, you see things that you probably wouldn't have seen if you were doing something else.
Yeah, and I've spent countless hours on my hands and knees in front of urinals. So, what's not to love?
Keep the bloodhounds. You can keep the urinals.
No, it is true though, because you get to see, particularly as a consultant, like you are, and so I sort of am as well. You're engaging with different companies in different sectors, so you do get to see a whole wealth of different buildings and exciting things. And yeah, it is very very interesting. I always find going into these kind of 5-star hotels among the most interesting, because front of house is just spectacular. And then you go back of house, and often it's quite dingy and grotty, and you can see that they haven't taken Branson's advice, because they're focusing all their efforts on the customer and not so much effort, often, not always, on the back of house. And actually, that if they lifted that up, that would probably have a knock-on effect on the customer experience and other things as well.
So you have a good list of where to take your family and where not to take them then.
Yes, I can certainly tell you. I won't publicise it on the podcast, but I can certainly tell you a few kitchens in central London that I certainly would never visit, because I've seen some fairly disgusting things in kitchens. So yes, exactly. There are some places are always going to be better than others, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely.
And you've recently done a sort of article and a poll, haven't you, on HSE People as well? Do you want to talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, so I'm sure, like many people have, I've seen countless sort of posts out there on social media around about the days before health and safety went mad, where we were allowed to do all sorts of things as children, sort of throwing asbestos in a fire and being out till all hours, and some of the other things that children used to get up to. And I just thought to myself, well, has health and safety stopped those things? That's still obviously the public perception, and as I mentioned, I think we are on a cusp of shifting that sort of perception. So I thought, well, why don't I try and release a poll to my sort of friends, acquaintances, and other people that I have on my social media accounts. So it wasn't really intended for health and safety professionals originally. It was intended to sort of gather some research to understand what people's actual opinion is. So I released it on my Facebook page, first of all, to canvass opinions and get some feedback. And some of the feedback that I was seeing was, no, actually health and safety hasn't taken over my life. And actually there is good things about health and safety that's prevented. And then I thought, well, I might as well sort of roll that on to other mediums. So I've circulated it around our company within Ellis Whittam. And then I've circulated it via HSE People on LinkedIn as well. So I'm hoping to see some sort of good results. I think from with a sort of mind of, how do I get the same message across, but in a fresh or new way or a different way? Is there something else that can grab people's attention?
And that's what I grapple with a lot as well. In my area is how to cut through the noise and get attention, because everybody is clearly aware of the problem that I help to solve, but they don't necessarily have it at the top of their list of things to think about. So it's a very similar, analogous to what you're saying. People kind of know about this, but they're not really thinking about it. So how do you grab their attention?
I missed that. I broke up. Say that again.
So I was just saying that it's analogous. What I do and what you're saying there is about how do you grab people's attention, and because they're not thinking about these things necessarily, they're not top of mind, but they're important. And so what strategies can you employ to get them just to sort of to influence their thinking, as you said earlier, to use the word you used earlier?
Yeah. So I was thinking about an analogy about this the other day, and it's almost sort of using the, if you're thinking about putting on some clothes, about, getting something to fit. So you don't just buy something and sort of put it on and it doesn't fit. And that's often with health and safety, is what you're trying, particularly as a consultant, it can be quite difficult, because if you haven't got context and you don't understand the sort of relational aspect of who you're dealing with, then sort of applying a box is not going to work for a circle. So with the whole clothes thing analogy, is making sure that you've got the right information, that you've tried it on and it actually does work. So getting the feedback from individuals and making sure that you've framed it right. So it's very difficult at times to apply something that's very generic to various organizations, as you can imagine we do and you do yourself. I think it's about getting to know people and building that sort of relationship aspect before you then give them a square.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point, actually, because it's something that I have been trying to do, is to create sort of frameworks and models and philosophies and stuff, which are sort of widely applicable. But to do that, they have to be philosophical. They have to, rather than do this, because that doesn't work. But actually, have you considered these 3 or 4 points, or have you? Here's a structured way of thinking about something, but the detail of that is only going to be answerable based on the individual requirements of the building or the business or whatever. But I do think that if as a third party trying to supply a service or a product to somebody, you've got to, I think it's helpful to be able to show you've got a methodology or something like that, because that gives people the, particularly when you're selling something intangible like health and safety, it gives them the confidence that you know what you're talking about, I suppose.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned, you don't want to do something that is sort of way out left or right field. It has to be the same thing that we're talking about, which is legislation, but that's relevant and applicable to an individual. So I love the things that I'm seeing just now run about, it's changing from compliance to care, and because at the end of the day, it's all about looking after individuals, and it's very difficult to persuade individuals to look after themselves, but it has to be relevant to them. They've got to understand why it is you're doing it, as opposed to their sort of perception. And that was really what the poll was aimed at, was what's your perception of health and safety versus what's the reality of health and safety.
And going back to COVID, actually, it brings that into sharp focus, because you just said, it's difficult to get people to look after themselves, and you can see that with the people that are, not wanting to get vaccinated, or not wanting to wear masks, or I've been reading things about the States where people have been rocking up at hospital, very, very ill. And the doctors have been saying, well, you've got COVID-19. And these people have been saying, well, that's impossible because it's all a hoax. And they're having to put these people on oxygen and they're dying, they're literally dying, taking their last breath, saying it's all not true. So that just shows you how difficult it is to get people to look after themselves.
Yeah, it's a mindset change, isn't it? It's definitely a mindset change.
Not easy, but I do find that sometimes people, it's easier to get through to people by, let's say you're working in a kitchen, and it's something around, safety in the kitchen, whatever it is, cutting, manual handling, slips, burns, whatever. I sometimes find it's easier to talk to people about, you want to protect your mate who you work with rather than protecting you yourself, because I think people if you know somebody and you've got that relationship with them, then obviously you have that kind of feeling of wanting to protect them as well, don't you? Perhaps more so than yourself sometimes.
Yeah, and interestingly, in schools, if a team within a school that, we talked about, they want to look after the students and the kids, and anything that's sort of focused on kids and students, it tends to happen. But if it's focused on the building, it doesn't tend to happen. And I think, again, it's this mindset shift of, well, if you didn't have a building to teach in, then you can't look after the kids. I once had talking about what you're talking about, I once had a heated discussion or conversation with a chap in a factory, and I can't remember what I was trying to convince him of, but it was, he disagreed, and I was trying to sort of influence and sort of inspire and persuade him. And then the conversation shifted to, do you know how I lost that finger? and I thought, well, that's what I'm saying to you. And even you've experienced the poor side of health and safety by losing a digit, and then you still, you don't get it. So yeah, it's psychology, isn't it? Psychology 101 often is what we're all doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've had a couple of recent episodes actually talking about these kinds of issues. So check those out yourself. You'd enjoy them, but also anybody listening to this would appreciate those as well. With Anton and my namesake Christian the last few weeks ago, talking about habit forming and the fact that, if someone does something again and again and again and something bad doesn't happen, even if they know there is a risk, they still carry on doing it. And it's how do you change people's mindsets around that, which is obviously easier said than done. We'll check out that article then and do the poll on the anybody that's listening on the HSE People site, and fingers crossed you get a good response and some good learnings from that. So should we shift focus then a bit and go into some of the other topics that you were keen to discuss? So you've mentioned that you have lots of clients in the public sector, so I think there were some particular questions you were interested to discuss around how to manage slips and trips in that sector, in those kinds of settings. So where did you want to start, Scott?
So let's start with let's stick with education for now, and let's start with multi-academy trusts. So this model of multi-academy trust now moving throughout the UK. I guess the first question that I'd ask you as a slips, trips, falls expert is, if you have multiple premises, such as a multi-academy trust, what's the best way in terms of assessing all your premises, and then sort of prioritizing what premises needs action? And because obviously in a school you have multiple areas. You could have a gymnasium, you could have a sports hall, you could have just general corridors, a kitchen. Some schools have swimming pools.
So good question, and it's applicable to, it's the same conversation I have often with a shopping centre company, a pub company, or whatever. So we've got this big estate, how do we prioritise it? So I would say a couple of things. Firstly, you should look at your accident and claims data, because just by looking at that, and that's hard data of things that have actually happened Certainly the claims obviously is hard data. Accidents, obviously, as we know, reporting can be up and down. But if you look at your accident and claims data, you may well see that there are certain buildings, certain sites that are spiking up, that might be areas of concern, or conversely, ones that are performing a lot better than average, and think, well, actually, what can we learn from there? I would say that's the first thing I would start to look at. I would also look at, in terms of across the estates, I'd probably be interested to do. So we've got a digital self-assessment tool that people could use to do this, but do a very high level risk assessment for each site and then compare and contrast those. So our tool takes about 5 minutes to complete. So you just answer some yes/no questions, and then it gives you scores, 7 scores overall. And then you can start to compare and contrast those scores. I'd be looking at, for example, if you've got schools with pools, then obviously there's a particular risk around swimming pools that would put those higher up the list. If you've got older schools, those are probably at potentially a higher risk because you probably don't know what the floor surfaces are, whereas the more recently constructed schools you would hope would have better floor surfaces, and the architects would have had a better understanding of resistance to start with. So there's a few different factors you can start to pull together to look at. Here's the estate, and here's maybe some areas of priority where we can start to investigate a bit more. Because, as you say, it's not, if you've got hundreds of sites or dozens of sites, you can't go as in depth as you might want to on every single one of them every single time.
Yeah. And I had a recent experience with a slip resistance test carried out by a third party, and it was for a swimming pool, and it didn't tell me or the client anything.
Yeah.
So what should a school or an education client be looking for on the back end of one of those reports?
So when you say it didn't tell you anything, I assume what you mean is it told you that the floor was slippery when it was wet, and that was it.
Which is what we already knew, which is why we needed this test.
Yeah, that's there's an interesting discussion or debate, a heated conversation like yours, shall we say, around this, because you've got basically two types of organisations in this world of slips and trips that do testing. One cohort would be people who say we're independent testers, and you can trust our testing because we don't have any solutions to sell you, and therefore we're fully independent, and blah blah blah. And then the other side, which is kind of what we do, where we're focused on the solutions, and the testing is more of a means to an end, because actually the testing is used to diagnose the problem, and then it's okay, well, how can we solve the problem? And there's challenges with both sides. So, clearly and there's a lot of evidence of this, if you've got somebody that's got a solution, and they're coming in and basically trying to sell you on the solution, they're not necessarily going to be giving you the impartial advice. Whereas what you saw was the impartial advice, but then no added value in terms of the solution. So I personally think, there are different times when you might use one or the other. I suppose what we try to do with our business is, because we work with the likes of AXA Insurance and Marsh and CBRE and various other brand names, we would hope that we've got that credibility that we're going to give you the right advice, and we obviously will be looking down the solutions route. But in terms of how you could go about solving that problem around a swimming pool, it's no different really than a kitchen or a corridor or whatever. I tend to look at two things. One is, how likely is it that floor is going to be wet or contaminated? So around a swimming pool, yes, it's very likely it's always going to be, and therefore you need to address that in a certain way. Whereas a corridor in the middle of a school, it's less likely. So you start to have this zonal approach.
Yep.
And then if you're in an environment where the floor is going to be wet or contaminated and it's slippery, then the question becomes, was the floor always slippery? In other words, is it a bad floor? Or was it a good floor? Or it is a good floor, but it just hasn't been maintained very well, and therefore you could do something through the cleaning regime, the maintenance regime, to improve it. But the only way to answer that second question would be to actually go that step further with the testing and say, right, well, we've tested it as it is. In dry conditions, it's safe. In wet conditions, it's slippery. Okay, now let's clean it and let's retest it and see if it changes. And then let's try cleaning it a different way and see if it changes or not. So you have to go through this kind of step-by-step process to diagnose whether it's a floor problem or whether it's a cleaning problem.
Sure. So cleaning and maintenance are the two sort of initial, I guess, things that you would be looking at, and then obviously retesting.
Yeah. So if you've got to take a swimming pool or a kitchen or a toilet, some of it is going to get wet. Most of the time, if that's a relatively newly built building or refurbished building, the floor is going to have a certain level of slip resistance, you'd hope. And so if it's becoming slippery, it's probably down to cleaning and maintenance. So one of the biggest things we see is improper cleaning being done on textured floors and like mopping them and things like that. And so if you can get that cleaning right, then you give yourself a good chance of keeping the floor up to a good standard. So if you've got what appears to be a textured floor and it feels slippery, you can't necessarily conclude that it is an anti-slip floor, because you can have floors that are textured but not anti-slip. But the first thing I would try and do to try and address that problem myself would be, let's try and figure out a way of cleaning this floor better and getting it as clean as possible, because that will restore whatever slip resistance is there within the floor itself.
Okay, that's good. What about town and parish councils? So I often deal with a lot of these organisations round about the area in which I live in Gloucestershire, and often they only have a handful of staff that are employed by the council themselves, and they look after the various areas within the local community, such as public parks, cemeteries, and that type of thing. So how would a town or parish council, I guess it's a similar one to what we just talked about in terms of multiple premises or locations, but more around about sort of, if you have, say, roots of a tree sticking up through a path, what's some of the sort of reasonably practical things that a town or parish council could do?
I mean, I think on that example, you've got to have, I would suggest you've got to have a pre-planned schedule of reviewing and monitoring, and what's reasonable on that basis, probably annually or something like that would probably be fine. I mean, when it comes to slip testing of floors, the lawyers and the insurance companies that we work with would always like to see an annual slip test, for example. So if you've got that slip test data within a year of the accident, and it shows that the floor was compliant per the HSE guidelines, then they would feel very strongly that they can defend that claim. So it's about having as we talked about earlier, really a system and a process and something that works, that is repeatable, and you've got evidence that you've at least monitored it, because it wouldn't be reasonable, I don't think, to be checking that kind of thing every month or every week. So a year might be okay. You might say 6 monthly, you might say 18 months. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on tree growth necessarily. You might need to get Monty Don involved. Peelish Dan maybe. But I'd say that the main thing would be to have a structure, and that you stick to it, and you can prove and evidence that you've done what you said you were going to do, because your obligation isn't to prevent accidents. Your obligation is to do what's reasonably practicable to reduce the risk. And so if you've got something that you can show, well, look, we've understood the risk, we've appreciated the risk, we've identified it could be a risk, here's our schedule of looking at it, and then we've got ideally some kind of quantitative measure for, okay, this needs action or this doesn't need action. And as long as you stick to that, then you should, I'd have thought, be in a good position.
And what about, so I mentioned earlier, I worked for the ambulance service. So obviously you can't do slip tests on every possible location that you're going to visit as a member of the ambulance service. So you're heavily reliant upon footwear as your control measure. Have you got any sort of thoughts around about footwear for emergency services personnel?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we, going back to our discussion about sort of frameworks, so we have a model called CHIMES, which is the 6 reasons people slip. So it's contamination, so what's on the floor; heel, so the footwear; individual, human factors; maintenance, which is about cleaning and wear and tear, environment, so weather, steps, stairs, lighting, etc., noise, and surface, so how slippery the floor is. So it's about understanding, which, in any scenario, which of the chimes are controllable and which aren't. And if you can control all of them, then obviously try and do as well as you can on all of them. But if you can't control any one of them, or 2 or 3 of them, or whatever, then put more focus on the ones you can control. So you're quite right to say in that scenario, footwear becomes very important. I'd also say the human factors become important there as well. So making people understand that if you are, and again, you can't avoid this in that scenario, but if you are pushing, pulling, twisting, turning, or moving faster than a normal walking speed, then your requirement for friction increases. So just making people aware of that. There could be some things you could do as well around sort of environment in terms of lighting and things like that. So can we give people good torches or things like that so they can actually see where they're going, and so on and so forth. So there are a few things you could maybe look at. But going to the footwear, the big idea on footwear, the key thing people need to understand is that safety shoe doesn't mean slip resistant shoe. So there are countless safety shoes. That doesn't mean that they're going to give you good slip resistance, or they might give you good slip resistance in a kitchen, but not around a poolside and not on grass or whatever it might be. So it's matching the footwear to the environment you're likely to go into.
Yeah.
There are EN standards for footwear, but they're a bit like an 11 plus or something like that. And you want the PhD, which is the HSE has a testing method called GRIP, and many manufacturers are now putting their footwear through that scheme. And if you can get a 5-star GRIP rated shoe for the right environment, then that's going to give you the best chance of being as safe as possible.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to sort of heritage buildings, or buildings where an owner doesn't really want to upset the aesthetics or can't upset the aesthetics.
Yeah.
What could a responsible person do in those scenarios? So we're thinking here around about the old painting the yellow steps everywhere.
Yeah. So again, I'd revert back to that chimes model and consider each of the 6 areas, and to what extent is it controllable, and what are we doing on each of the 6 areas, and just try and do our best on whichever ones are applicable to us. Aesthetics is obviously a challenge. So I'm a member of a place called the Royal Automobile Club, which is a members club in London. And we've got a beautiful 100-plus-year-old clubhouse with the most stunning poolside with marble pool floor surround, and it's very slippery. So currently they have matting all around it, and it spoils it because actually it's covering all of the beautiful marble with matting. Yeah. But they're not allowed. English Heritage have basically said they're not allowed to do anything to change the floor. So they're kind of in that very difficult situation, kind of exactly what you've described. So therefore, matting for them is all they can really do, even though it actually goes against what English Heritage are trying to achieve, you would say. In terms of steps and the yellow lines, I think it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. I wouldn't say if you've done one staircase that you should then do every single staircase in your property, because stair safety comes down to lots of factors. One of them is being able to see the nosings, but a big factor is lighting and visibility. So if you've got poorly lit areas, then actually there's a good argument for doing the yellow nosings. Dimensions, consistency of dimensions. So what you want to do, if you think about it, the going, which is the horizontal, the bit you step on, and the rise, the vertical, they should be consistent throughout the whole staircase. And then because if you think about it, when you're walking downstairs, you're not thinking about where you're putting your feet. You place your foot on the first step, and then your brain thinks, right, all the stairs are the same. So the next time you place your foot in the same place and the same place and the same place. So if all of a sudden you've got a shorter going or a lower rise, that's where accidents often happen. So a good way to assess that is literally just do what we call the crouch sight test, which is go to the top of the staircase and crouch down until all of the nosings blend into one line. And then what you might find is that one is disappearing soon or one is sticking out. And that suggests you've got an issue with dimensions, and therefore you might want to think about taking some of these other steps, such as the painting to really demonstrate where the nosings are, or things like slip resistant nosings could be done as well. The other thing I would say is that when it comes to floor surfaces, and it's kind of a frustration about my example of that poolside, there are ways nowadays of treating existing floors, and they don't look discernibly different at all, but they're safe when wet. So there are often things that can be done that will be in keeping with the aesthetics and the ambience and all that sort of stuff that you want to maintain.
Yeah, that's great. So the model that you talked about, Chimes, is that freely available on your website, or
yeah. So it's slipsafety.co.uk/chimes, and then there's quite detailed text about each of them, and the scorecard, the self-assessment tool I mentioned, which is called the Slip Safety Scorecard, that basically asks you questions and then gives you a score for each of the 6 chimes and then an overall score. So last week, for example, I did a talk for the Chiltern IOSH branch, and we asked all of the attendees to take the scorecard in advance, and then what I did was I gave them a very quick overview of chimes, but then the 2 areas that on average they were weakest in, we did a deep dive into those areas, so that was quite useful for them. Have a look at that, and then take the scorecard. It's totally free to do, and it'll give you an idea of where some of the areas you could improve on, and it also gives you some tips and hints of what to do as well. And the other thing I'd say is, if you're interested in slips and falls, next month, I've been talking about this for the last 3 years, but I'm actually going to do something this now. It's September, which I'm calling Sliptember, and I'm doing a big campaign for the full month. So a lot of that will be going into chimes, giving more detail on LinkedIn and social media and stuff. So, and then the podcast is going to be, we're going to have 4 sort of slip and fall related interviews as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great for me, my colleagues, and my clients. I think for me, it's for the organisations I predominantly deal with. It's about what's the practical elements, and you've given some really sort of practical advice there, which is great.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to me, if you think about it, is split chimes. And you've got 6 chimes, and 3 of them relate to the floor. So, as a minimum, if you could improve the cleaning of your floor to make it more effective, that's going to give you a good outcome. So and floors are cleaned regularly, if not every day. So, is it reasonable to clean them properly and effectively rather than improperly and ineffectively? Well, I would suggest it probably is, but people just don't really know how to do that. So that's certainly one area I would look at. Footwear, obviously, if you can control it, is a massive win. So I've seen, I don't make or sell any footwear or make any money from footwear in any way, shape or form. But I've seen, 80+% reductions in accidents by getting the right slip resistant footwear into buildings as well. So, if you've got a good floor, you give yourself half a chance. But, you can't necessarily know if you've got a good floor or not, but, certainly the cleaning. And by that, the 2 things I mean. One is deal with spillages and incidents where the floor gets wet that's unexpected as quickly and as possible, and dry that floor. And then in areas where, like a swimming pool or an entrance or a kitchen or a toilet, where the floor is going to get wet, try and be as effective as you can at actually removing the contamination from the floor and leaving the floor clean, because that's when the floor's clean, it's going to give the best possible performance. As soon as there's any contamination on the floor in terms of grease or oils or body fats or calciums or whatever, then you're producing a barrier between the foot and the floor, and the floor isn't going to perform as well as it could.
Yeah, no, that's great. Really good.
Good stuff. All right, Scott. Well, thanks for grilling me. I'm sweating profusely after that. That's okay, really. Really enjoyed that. Appreciated it. Where we talked about your article, but where else can people go to find out about you? Give us some plugs or some website links or social media or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so you can find me on Ellis Whittam, and my profile is on the Ellis Whittam website. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook as well. And we host various different things. So we're hoping to be doing an event down in Buckingham in October, I think it is, and various other exhibitions, conferences type things. And we run a quarterly breakfast briefing, which people can access via the Ellis Whittam COVID-19 hub, which is free to access. So you can listen to me every 3 months talking about risks in education. So I think the topic I'm going to be doing in September is radon and road safety.
Nice.
So I was trying to do an A to Z of risks within education.
That's a good idea. That's something I've been thinking about doing, is like an A to Z, but I just haven't. And I was going to get, thinking about doing like a little booklet, almost like a downloadable booklet, and getting other people to contribute to it. So not me writing it, but actually getting different people in. So perhaps
Let's do it.
Spur me on.
Yeah.
Spur me on to get it done finally.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much, Scott. Really enjoyed that. Really appreciate you sharing your time. Hope everybody at home found that useful as well. So hopefully I didn't waffle on too much. Please, if you've enjoyed the episode, please give us a review. Please hit subscribe as well, and then you'll be notified as new episodes come up. And do look forward to the next couple of episodes. We've got some good guests coming up. Next week, we should have Jeff Trickey from a business that runs a risk type compass. I think you'd enjoy this, Scott. It's basically almost like a personality test, but it gives you a risk type, and that's a really fascinating interview. I'm looking forward to doing. I did the compass, and we're going to walk through my reports, so that'll be interesting. And then obviously we've got September coming up in September as well. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.